Chapter 1, Birth of Synistra. Synistra was not born but created, a perfect fusion of two powerful entities. In a hidden lab, her genetic structure was manipulated by a team of ruthless scientists working under the command of a shadowy mastermind. They had taken the genetic codes of Psylocke, the powerful telepath, and Mister Sinister, the master manipulator, to create a being who could control both minds and the very essence of life itself. Sinistra's existence was not one of warmth or love but of cold calculation. She was meant to be the ultimate weapon, an entity who could bend the world to her will. However, as her eyes first opened, a strange sense of unease filled her mind. Something was wrong. The first years of her life were spent in isolation, training her powers under the watchful eye of her creators. They taught her to harness the telepathic abilities she inherited from Psylocke, and to manipulate genetics as Sinister had once done. Yet, despite all their efforts to mold her into a tool of their design, Synistra began to question her existence. The more she learned, the more she realized that her purpose was not as clear as they had told her. Was she truly meant to serve them, or was she more than the sum of her parts? As her mind expanded with knowledge, so did her doubts. One fateful night, Sinistra's powers surged in a violent storm of psychic energy, causing her to break free from the constraints of her creators. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but she felt a strange freedom. She was no longer bound by their rules, she was free to define herself. The lab was in ruins, and as she escaped into the world beyond, Synistra knew she had begun a journey that would either destroy her or lead her to the truth about her own identity. Chapter 2, Awakening. The world outside the lab was chaotic, a vast expanse of uncharted territory for someone like Synistra. She could sense the minds of others, their thoughts and emotions spilling into her own consciousness like a torrent. It was overwhelming, disorienting, and for a moment, she thought she might lose herself to the flood of information. But then, something clicked. She focused, and the voices quieted. Her telepathic abilities were not just a tool, they were a part of her, something she could control if she learned how. As Synistra honed her powers, she encountered other beings, mutants, mercenaries, and shadowy figures all bent on their own goals. Some of them tried to manipulate her, thinking her an easy target, but they soon realized how dangerous she truly was. One of these encounters led to a battle with another telepath, who tried to overpower Synistra with his mental abilities. In that moment, Sinistra's true potential was revealed. She not only defended herself but dominated the other telepath's mind, bending him to her will and leaving him a broken shell. This victory was bittersweet. While she had proven her power, Synistra knew it came at a cost. The more she used her abilities, the further she slipped into the abyss of her own psyche. She feared what might become of her if she continued down this path, if she gave in to the seductive allure of power. The path before her was unclear, but one thing was certain: she would not allow herself to be controlled. She would control, or she would perish. Chapter 3, The Inner Conflict. Synistra spent days in isolation, wrestling with her thoughts. Her telepathic abilities had unlocked doors in her mind she hadn't even known existed. She could hear the desires, fears, and weaknesses of those around her, and it filled her with an intense sense of power. But with that power came an overwhelming burden. She had been created as a weapon, a pawn in a larger game, and yet, she longed for more than that. She wanted autonomy. She wanted to carve her own destiny. It was in her solitude that Synistra began to realize the darker aspects of her existence. She was not just a person, she was a weapon, a creation of her twisted genetics. Every time she used her powers, she felt as though a piece of her humanity slipped away. The more she embraced her abilities, the more detached she became from the world around her. The voices in her mind, the whispers of her genetic creators, and the darker urges within her, spoke louder, urging her to embrace her true nature. But Synistra was torn. She didn't want to lose herself to this darkness. Her internal battle reached a boiling point when a group of rebels approached her with an offer. They had heard of her power and sought her help in overthrowing a corrupt regime that had taken control of the world. The rebels believed Synistra could be a key to their success, and they hoped she would join their cause. Synistra saw this as an opportunity, but an opportunity for what? To use them as pawns, or to find something more meaningful than the hollow existence she had known so far? The choice was hers, and she knew that whichever path she took would shape her future. Chapter 4: Meeting the Resistance. The rebels were an unexpected group, diverse, driven, and far more capable than Synistra had anticipated. They had their own agenda, one that didn't align with her creator's vision, and that intrigued her. There was something in the fire of their eyes, in their willingness to fight for a better world, that spoke to a part of Synistra she had long ignored. Perhaps she was not alone in her desire for freedom. Perhaps these people, too, were fighting for something greater than themselves. At first, Synistra viewed the rebels as tools, means to an end. They were capable of achieving goals she could not, and their willingness to fight against their oppressors made them useful to her. But as time went on, Synistra began to bond with them. She saw their humanity, their struggles, their hopes, their pain, and it reminded her of what she had lost. For the first time since her creation, Synistra felt something that resembled camaraderie. She found herself questioning her own motives, wondering if she was merely using them to fuel her own desires or if they were, in fact, her chance at redemption. However, Synistra was no fool. She knew that loyalty was a fragile thing. She had seen the darkness that resided within herself, and she had witnessed firsthand the destructive potential of her powers. As much as she wanted to trust these rebels, she couldn't help but feel that the moment would come when their allegiances would be tested. And she wondered, in the back of her mind, if she was truly capable of being part of something greater, or if, like everything else in her life, it would crumble under the weight of her own ambitions. Chapter 5: The Genetic Gamble. Sinistra's powers were growing stronger with each passing day. Her telepathic abilities were no longer just a tool for reading minds, she had learned to manipulate them, bending the wills of others to her desires. But it wasn't enough. She knew that to fully unlock her potential, she needed to tap into the deeper power within her. Her genetic structure, designed by Sinister himself, was a key to unlocking unimaginable abilities. She began experimenting on herself, using her genetic manipulation powers to alter her form. It was a dangerous gamble, one that could either enhance her powers or destroy her entirely. But Synistra was no stranger to risks. The first few attempts were minor, subtle changes, strengthening her physical form, enhancing her reflexes, and increasing her healing abilities. However, as she pushed her abilities further, she began to experience painful side effects. Her mind felt stretched, and her body began to warp. The more she changed herself, the less human she felt. In the midst of this transformation, Synistra began to realize that there was a price to pay for such power. Every alteration to her genetic code took away a little more of her humanity. She could feel the darkness encroaching on her mind, and the voices from her past, Sinister's twisted whispers, grew louder. Synistra knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she couldn't stop. The allure of ultimate power was too great, and she believed that in the end, she would be able to control it. But as her body and mind changed, Synistra started to wonder if the cost was truly worth it. Chapter 6: Shattered Allegiances. Sinistra's newfound power brought her to a crossroads. She had grown stronger, but she had also become more detached, more ruthless. The rebels, once allies, were beginning to see the cracks in her resolve. They feared the monster she was becoming. When Sinistra's actions led to the death of a beloved leader among their ranks, the rebellion's trust in her shattered. They saw her as a threat, a danger to their cause, and they made the difficult decision to turn against her. Betrayed and enraged, Synistra lashed out. She confronted the rebel group, her powers flaring as she manipulated their minds, making them see their worst fears. Her rage was uncontrollable, and she reveled in the destruction she caused. But deep down, a part of her felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: regret. Was this what she had become? A tool of destruction, a reflection of the very creators she had rebelled against. The rebel group fled, their mission in tatters, and Synistra stood alone once more. In the aftermath of the betrayal, Synistra found herself at a tipping point. She could continue down the path of darkness, using her power to crush anyone who opposed her, or she could seek redemption. But redemption was a foreign concept to her, one that seemed impossible given the twisted nature of her creation. She had been made to be a weapon, and weapons didn't have the luxury of second chances. Yet, something inside her whispered that there was still time to change, if only she could find a way to control the darkness that threatened to consume her. Chapter 7: Unleashing the Dark. Synistra embraced the darkness. She had no choice. Her mind was a battlefield, with the voices of Sinister urging her to fully realize her potential, and the remnants of her humanity trying to hold her back. The power she wielded now was beyond anything she had ever imagined. She could bend reality itself, warp time, and even control the genetic structure of others. But as she unleashed this power, she felt herself slipping further away from who she once was. In her quest for dominance, Synistra created monsters, creatures twisted by her genetic manipulation, loyal only to her will. They were her army, her servants, and through them, she could achieve anything. Yet, as she watched them tear through the landscape, laying waste to everything in their path, a part of her began to question whether this was truly the path she wanted. Her powers had become too great, too uncontrollable, and she feared that soon there would be nothing left of her but the monster she had created. The breaking point came when Synistra found herself face to face with her creator, Mister Sinister. He had come to collect his prize, to remind her of her purpose. He offered her a choice: join him in his quest for domination, or become his greatest failure. The battle between them was fierce, a clash of wills, but in the end, Synistra realized that she didn't need Sinister. She didn't need anyone. She could stand on her own, and if she had to destroy everything in her path to do it, she would. Chapter 8: The Echo of Sinister. After defeating Sinister, Synistra was left with the hollow feeling of victory. She had beaten him, but in doing so, she had come face to face with her own reflection. The power she had sought so desperately had consumed her, and she was no longer sure of who she was. The echo of Sinister's influence still rang in her mind, urging her to embrace her full potential and dominate the world. But Synistra realized that she was not just a product of her genes. She was her own person, and the path forward was hers to choose. As she stood over Sinister's lifeless form, Synistra felt a surge of power. It was intoxicating, but it was also isolating. She could do anything now. No one could stop her. But the voices in her head, the ones that had guided her through the darkness, began to speak differently. They no longer whispered commands, they spoke of possibilities, of redemption, of a future where she could choose her own path. For the first time, Synistra wondered if there was more to her than just destruction. The final choice was hers: would she embrace her role as the ultimate ruler, or would she try to forge a new path, one where she could control her destiny without losing herself? As she walked away from Sinister's legacy, Synistra knew that the journey was far from over. She had the power to reshape the world, but whether she would do so for good or ill remained uncertain. Chapter 9: The Final Confrontation. The world had begun to take notice of Sinistra's rise to power. The remnants of the rebellion, along with other powerful factions, were uniting against her. They saw her as a threat, someone who could not be allowed to continue her unchecked destruction. The final battle was inevitable. Synistra faced an army, an alliance of those who had once stood against her and those who feared her power. But for Synistra, this was more than a fight for control, it was a test of who she had become. As the battle raged on, Synistra unleashed everything she had. Her telepathic powers twisted minds, her genetic manipulation reshaped the battlefield, and her own body became a weapon of destruction. But despite her overwhelming power, there was a part of her that hesitated. She could feel it, the tug of humanity, the desire to protect, to save. It was buried deep within her, but it was there. In the end, Synistra made her choice. She could destroy them all, but what would it mean? Would she be any different than the creators who had shaped her, or would she simply be another tyrant? With a final, decisive strike, Synistra shattered the alliance, but instead of wiping them out, she allowed them to retreat. She had proven her power, but she had also proven that she was more than just a weapon. The path to redemption was unclear, but Synistra had begun the journey to reclaim her humanity. Chapter 10: A New Beginning. In the aftermath of the battle, Synistra stood alone once more, but this time, she was not the same. She had tested her limits, faced her darkest impulses, and come to understand the true cost of power. The world was in ruins, but Synistra was not interested in domination. She had won her freedom, but now, the question remained, what would she do with it? Her future was uncertain. She could continue down the path of destruction, using her powers to reshape the world in her image. Or she could choose a different path, one of healing, of redemption. The voices in her mind were quiet now, no longer urging her toward chaos. They had become something else, whispers of hope, of potential, of a future where she could control her destiny without sacrificing her humanity. As Synistra walked away from the battlefield, the world lay before her. The choices she made would determine her future, but for the first time, she knew that she had the power to shape it. The story of Synistra was far from over, but she was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. She was the architect of her own fate.